Oh, okay. Hello. Welcome
Hello.
to. Hi, Corey. How are you?
Fine.
I'm super excited to begin interviewing you.
Mhm.
Corey, welcome to Mind Body Spirit Virtual Summit. We're super excited to have you. You have a topic that is a bit different from some of the other ones, which is super exciting. And I'm excited for people to learn more about the subconscious mind and the unknown. So, without much delay, I'm going to start by reading Corey's bio and then we'll get into it. So, Corey, say your last name for me. Develle?
Develle.
Develle. Corey Develle is the owner and founder of Orange County Hypnosis Center. He has been a practicing hypnotherapist for more than 50 years. He is a published author of 2 books and is currently writing his 3rd book entitled The Compliant Child Syndrome. It's difficult to condense what I've learned about the subconscious mind in the past 5 decades, says Corey. But let me put it this way. It's not so much about what a person says to himself as much as it is about what he deeply believes about himself. That makes the difference between the success and or failure of his life. I love that.
Thank you.
That is excellent.
It's
Corey, tell me how you got into hypnosis.
yeah, well, it actually started very, very early on for me. I read a book about Franz Mesmer back when in the early '60s, actually, when I was a teenager, and I became fascinated with what he referred to as animal magnetism. And then I started reading other books on what they called later, they referred to it as hypnosis, meaning essentially, basically, it's sleep therapy, so to speak. That's what hypnosis basically means, or hypnotherapy basically means is sleep therapy. And the reason is because the word hypno basically means sleep.
Huh.
So anyway, the bottom line is that what it actually entails there was very fascinating to me, that people could actually reach the subconscious mind or the belief system in themselves, not through a conscious effort, but through a subconscious effort. And it was fascinating to me because I would watch like the people on television, who would put somebody to sleep on, let's say, the Ed Sullivan Show or something like
Yeah.
that. And they'd have them be stiff as a board, and they'd put a chair on one end of them, on their head, and another one at their feet. And then they'd sit on the person, and they wouldn't move. They would just be perfectly still. And I thought, wow, that is amazing that the body can respond so much to this simple thing called suggestion.
Right.
So I started working with my family. I have 7 brothers and 4 sisters, and
Wow.
I had a whole group of people I could work with. So I would help them, overcome their fears, like if for tests or relationships with my older brothers and sisters, to help them, be calmer about the things that they were doing. And I was just a kid, but I was helping them, in a kind of a funny way. It was interesting to me in the beginning, and I could use it at parties and that sort of thing to kind of
Yeah.
break the ice with people, and do a lot of things. We were talking a little bit about it before the show, that I would go to parties, and I'd suggest to a person that they couldn't find their butt. And then, part of the process was to tell them, okay, when I woke them up, I'd say, okay, you want to sit down? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, oh, why don't you just sit over here? And they'd go walk over to the chair, and they just look at it. And then they just stand there for a while, and everybody at the party would just start laughing. And
Wow.
I'd say, yeah, well, what's going on? What's the matter? And they'd say, well, I can't find my butt. And I'd say, are you sure? And they'd say, yeah, I just don't know where it is. I knew it was here. And, it would just go on and on. It was just really funny, and everybody had a good time with it. So
Oh my
that's
gosh.
basically how I got started. And then I realized a little bit later on that it could actually be very useful in helping people achieve their goals,
Right, right.
no matter what they were.
Oh, that's so funny. I mean, I haven't experienced that myself, but I think we'll have to go into that a little bit more because we see in the movies hypnotherapy, they usually have like the person with like the watch that goes back and forth, and like
Yeah.
that's sort of like the stereotypical hypnotherapy. How is it that or what is that creating, I guess, or and what kind of methods do you find helpful to get people into that state?
Yeah, for me, after after this long of doing it, I usually can, this either is speaking very highly of my ability or it's telling me that people are incredibly bored with my conversation. But I find that when I'm talking to people, I can tell that they start to go into a trance as I'm speaking to them. And it's during that time that I can suggest to them all these little helpful things about what they want to achieve. So the conversation generally will start off with them telling me what they'd like to achieve. And then I'll start to speak to them about how the conscious mind and subconscious mind work. And while I'm doing that, it so much takes them out of their awake state, so to speak, that frontal lobe kind of linear thinking way. And for a while, they just indulge what I'm saying. And during that time, they actually slip right into a very light trance-like state. And then I can start talking to the subconscious mind. And they're thinking, the person on the frontal lobe area is actually thinking they're having a conversation with me. And I'm actually suggesting to the subconscious mind already that they're past these issues that were going on for them. And then usually during the course of the session, I'll ask them, if they come to me and they say, okay, well, I want to get over, this issue with Oreo cookies, for instance, or something. And I'll find out what food they actually don't like, or this is something that I used to do. This is how I used to use hypnosis. A person would come to me and say, I want to quit eating Oreo cookies. And at that time, I just thought, okay, all I have to do is just suggest to them that Oreo cookies are going to taste like something they really don't like Brussels sprouts or something.
Right. That makes sense.
Then I'd wake them up, and when I would wake them up, I'd offer them a cookie or an Oreo cookie or something like that, and they go, ugh, this is not what I want. Those are awful. I don't want that. But the problem that I noticed was the following week they'd come back and they'd say, well, now I have an issue with ding dongs or Twinkies or,
it wasn't solving
I'm substituting that for the Oreo cookie. So initially this, what hypnosis does is literally a Band-Aid until we find the source of where that trauma, let's say, comes from.
Okay.
When we get to the location of the actual form of the trauma that's created the behavior, whether it's fear, anxiety, doubt, not progressing in relationships or their business hits a certain plateau and they don't feel they can go any farther than that or whatever it happens to be, I have to go find where the original source of that trauma is.
Yeah.
And once I release that, all of the rest of it falls down like a bunch of dominoes and all kinds of other areas of their lives clear up in ways that are exponential, actually.
Wow, that sounds so cool. I love that. I mean, personally, I work a lot with the subconscious mind as well, so I'm right there with you. But for some people who might still wondering what the difference is between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind, you had talked about it so eloquently before. Can you go into a little bit more about what the subconscious mind is?
Yes, the conscious mind is that part of us that's primarily frontal lobe. It's very linear, very logical, very rational, and that's the part of us that's engaged in the world through the five senses, what you can see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. So it's very important for people to know that when they are visiting, let's say, a hypnotherapist, or somebody like myself, many times the fear that they have is that we're going to change something about their very active and positive and useful conscious mind. They're thinking, some part of me, that very valuable part of me is going to have to be compromised in some way. But it isn't.
Right.
What happens is we're dealing with the subconscious mind, and there's a massive difference between what happens on a conscious level and what happens on a subconscious level. As I mentioned, the conscious mind is all about what you can see, touch, taste, hear, and smell, very logical and linear. The subconscious mind is not very logical or linear. It is very much engaged in emotion and a belief system, and it doesn't have to be logical. In fact, most of the emotions that we are experiencing, as I'm sure you probably know, most of them aren't logical.
Right.
But we're trying to get the conscious mind to figure out why we have, let's say, an unusual emotion about, let's say, fear of heights or something like that.
Sure.
We might be standing on a ladder or something and have this terrible feeling that we're falling. We're asking the conscious mind to overcome that because we're thinking, look, I'm only 4 feet up in the air. Even if I fall down, I'm not going to break anything.
Right.
But I have this terrible fear. Well, the conscious mind is trying to figure that out, but it doesn't know the answer. So the only thing that it can do is give us a reason for why we should feel that way. Now, this is kind of difficult for people to get, but what it boils down to is the conscious mind wants to be useful. So what happens when we're asking it about an emotional issue that's buried in the subconscious mind, the conscious mind can't give us the rational answer for why we're feeling this kind of anxiety or fear, frustration, whatever it is. So it actually turns on us and gives us reasons for why we should feel that way. And we buy into it, basically. And most of those reasons are self-deprecating reasons. They're all just basically disapproving of ourselves. And this is where people find that they're trying to accomplish something in life, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a relationship, how they have these patterns of the wrong kinds of people coming into their lives, or they keep moving from one job to another, or something like that, when they actually could find the reason for why they're doing that buried in the subconscious mind. If we let go of the trauma associated with that behavior, what happens is they're no longer experiencing the thought processes that lead them to those kinds of tendencies.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. I mean, I think it's, at least from what I've gathered too, it's people, they'll say consciously, no, I do want a relationship, but I keep meeting all these guys, for instance, that are maybe not great for me, right? Or no, I really do want to be successful in business, but it's not happening. So there obviously is this disconnect and people feel it, but they just don't understand it.
Exactly. And they're looking for an answer more often than not outside of themselves. They're thinking one way or another, it'll be, well, I don't have enough education.
Right.
They might have all the education in the world, but, well, I have to get specialized in this other area in order for me to open the door to having more success in my practice, whatever it happens to be. And they'll put all of that out there in the world in one way or another, but there'll always be something else they'll need to do out there that isn't giving them the permission they're looking for on the inside.
Oh, that's so important. I mean, it's so true. It's like, well, then people are just going to keep searching. I'll be happy when, it'll make sense when, and it's never about that, right?
It just goes on and on and on.
It's a total vicious cycle. And I like, the word trauma too, because it encompasses so many different types of instances or occurrences that might have happened to make somebody believe something that they believe. So I would love it if you could go into the different types of trauma that you primarily work with. Absolutely.
Yeah. The first level of trauma that I've noticed, and again, a lot of this just is practical experience.
Sure.
There are other people that have written probably many books on the subject, like Freud and Watson and others. That talk about different forms of trauma. And, in the Freudian perception, it was all about going back to where the original source of traumas were. And there's a very valid argument there that it's very useful. The only problem that I find with going back all the way to the original trauma in standard therapy is that it takes a long time, and you're counting on your conscious mind for the most part to get you there. And many times, many of the traumas are things that are buried in the subconscious mind, and we don't remember them. Right. So it's kind of hard to access those. But anyway, the first form of trauma is the emotional trauma.
Okay.
And that's something that everybody has experienced. And many times people will think, oh, well, it has to be something really major and significant for it to be emotional, but it doesn't. It can be something as simple as the way a person looks at you.
Absolutely.
And it creates a kind of angst in a person, a feeling of being unworthy or whatever it happens to be, or being guilty or not being, let's say, positive in one way or another. There's the negative connotation to it. So that's the emotional trauma. That's the first level, I would say, that most people are experiencing. The second level is physical trauma, or shock, as some people call it. And the physical trauma is usually the escalation of the emotional trauma. In other words, if a person's constantly worrying and they don't do anything about the source of that worry, it usually will escalate into something like a stomach ailment, ulcers, that sort of thing. That's when you notice that it becomes physical. But you can also have physical trauma or physical shock without an emotional attachment to it. For instance, and this is a case that I'm referring to now, a lady who was at a light, and she was waiting for the light to change, and the next thing she knew, she woke up in a hospital.
Wow.
Yeah. So, what happened was this guy was driving down the street, drunk driver, didn't have his lights on. She didn't even know he was coming. The next thing you know is that she's in the hospital, and the trauma was very severe for her. She got out of the hospital, and everybody was saying to her, well, are you okay, and all of that stuff. She said, of course, yeah, I can drive, I'm fine. And she did drive around perfectly fine for a little while until she got back to that same place where the accident happened. While she was sitting at the light there, and she hadn't really thought about it, by the way. She was just sitting at the light, and all of a sudden this overwhelming sense of dread came over her, and she literally had to pull the car over to the side of the road and was trembling. Her whole body was just trembling. She couldn't drive. Well, her head hurt. There was this, terrible sense of nausea, that sort of thing. And so when I was working with her, I found out that when she was actually rear-ended, her head actually went through the rear window of the car. That's how she was hit. Her head went through the back window. And that's where the head, was like aching now, when she was experiencing that trauma sitting at a light now. All of a sudden, all of these painful issues like headaches were coming back. Her body went through this nausea thing that was going on, and the terror, that was running through her body. And it was all, as far as she was concerned, relatively unfounded because she just woke up in a hospital.
Right, absolutely.
So that's the physical side of trauma. Now, the cellular side of it actually is another kind of escalation of emotional trauma. If we don't take care of it on an emotional level, it escalates to the physical. Okay. And I explained that physical can be in and of itself an independent trauma. Sure. But the cellular trauma is also an extension of the emotional turning physical and then going to a cellular level. When we don't take care of it on a physical level, it escalates to a cellular level, and that's when it attacks the immune system. Huh. And those are, in my opinion, I'm not an MD, but in my opinion, that's where a lot of the sources for immunological problems like cancers and that sort of thing start. And they can be cured. Not only have I seen it happen, but there's a well-known speaker out there named Greg Braden who actually witnessed a person experiencing a trauma disappearing in their body at a hospital in Beijing, as the doctors in this medicineless hospital were actually standing around a patient and were just basically visualizing the patient in a healed state. And they had this, I think it was a sonogram, looking at the tumor inside the body of the woman as they were doing this process of visualizing her in a perfectly healthy state. And they were doing this chant, and they were literally chanting the tumor away, and the tumor shrunk and actually dissipated and disappeared right on the screen. Yeah,
absolutely amazing.
That's the third level. Now, what I've experienced in my practice as well is a fourth level of trauma, which is spiritual trauma. And that one is, winds up really getting heavy into metaphysics. Sure. And that kind of work is very, very interesting. That's where a lot of past life regressions can be very helpful.
So cool.
And I had somebody who came in just this week, as a matter of fact, who was experiencing a lot of trauma in her practice. She's an attorney, and was hitting a certain level of success in her practice, but not able to expand it beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And, but she was also having some other issues that I didn't even know about. Well, she came in on a Saturday, and I started working with her. And the method I employ, which we can probably talk about a little bit later, had to do with talking to the subconscious mind to find out where the actual issue was. She thought it was something to do with a recent breakup that she had with a person that made her feel very bad about herself, and that she just didn't feel like she could continue being successful and doing the things she wanted to do. She just had very low self-esteem. So I started to do some CSI work there, subconscious mind, and found out that the actual source of the trauma wasn't the breakup. It was actually with her father. And then when I started asking the subconscious mind, well, was this something that happened maybe in infancy or something like that? Subconscious mind said, no, it went back farther than that. And I thought, well, okay, was this something that maybe happened, during pregnancy? Because that happens.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It said, no, it went back farther than that. So then I said, was this something that was a carryover from a previous life? And it said, yes, absolutely. So I said, okay, well, is it important to know how far back it went? And it said, yes. And I started with 100 years back and said, no, it's more and more and more and more. Oh. We went back between 1,000 and 1,500 years ago.
Wow.
And her father in this life, as it turns out, to make a long story probably a little bit longer, because it's so interesting.
It's so interesting. I mean, I love it. Just keep going.
This is what happened. I found out that she and her father were in a husband-wife relationship in Mexico over 1,000 years ago, and that she was actually a sacrifice. And I don't know if you know much about the Mayan culture, but I was finding out what was going on there with all of that, and it had something to do with them sacrificing a beautiful woman for the benefit of their particular society. Mm-hmm. And she was looked upon as that sacrifice, and there was a resentment in her that went all the way back to that time frame and was carried all the way forward. And she could never understand why she had such a bad relationship with her dad. He tried to be like a really good father to her and all of that stuff, yeah, but always had this underlying resentment for him. And she said she couldn't trace it back. She said, he always seemed to be a nice guy. I mean, he encouraged me to do this and that, and he always told me that I could, do whatever I wanted to do. And she said, I can't remember any reason in this life for having that kind of resentment. But once we found out the source, mm-hmm, her whole physical demeanor changed. Right during the course of the session, I was talking to her subconscious mind, and her subconscious mind was so willing to let go, but it had to give her some peace on this end of the spectrum to know where it came from, because she was judging herself so much, not allowing herself to succeed, because she had this judgment against herself that went back to a time frame that she couldn't even remember, obviously.
Right.
She had this resentment for her father that seemed unfounded.
Right.
And once she got to the source of that and let go, her whole body changed. I mean, cool. She sat down, and her heart was beating a little fast, and then she looked at me and she just said, it's as if all of those old fears and doubts and anxieties that I've had my whole life just suddenly disappeared.
Wow.
So anyway, we got her on her way. She was, happily dancing out of the room. And she called me later that evening, and she said, I don't know if this is supposed to be a part of it or not, but she said, I was smoking when I came to see you, and I know we didn't even talk about this, but she said, I don't want to smoke. Is that normal? And I said, well, sure, that's a byproduct of, not having all of this guilt and sure, so on and so forth. And then she called me about another hour later, and she said, I was about to have a drink, and I'm finding that alcohol doesn't have that much appeal to me. And she said, I didn't tell you this, but I've been drinking a lot lately, and I'm not attracted to it. Is that normal? And I said, yeah. And she said, I'm making an appointment for tomorrow. There's something else I want to do. So she came in the next day, and this was all the way for, it's more than 120 miles away. She drove all the way back to have another session so that she could get something else cleared up.
Wow.
But that's how powerful it can be, because it's profoundly important for people to understand that so much of what's dictating their life has to do with their belief system. And that belief system is firmly embedded in the subconscious mind. It's not so much about what you're trying to do. Everybody wants to have a pretty good life.
Yeah.
But what they're not understanding is why that belief system is in place that's saying, well, you can have so much of something, but any more than that is not going to be permitted.
Right.
There's a cap on the kind of success you can have, or there's a cap on the kind of good relationship you can have, or the kind of health that you can have.
Yeah.
There are all of these caps that we have that they're just unsubstantiated. They're not even supposed to be there. And if we can find out the source of why they're there and what we can do about it, letting go of that trauma that's associated with it, what a person finds is they can have just about anything that they want.
So awesome. I'm when you bring somebody, let's say you brought her back, or she brought herself back, right, to that Mayan lifetime.
Yeah.
Is it a matter of just being in that state of whatever original trauma that is, noticing that emotion that you're feeling and just asking the subconscious to let it go? Or do they need to really relive that whole moment?
In some cases, they do, but I always find out from the subconscious mind whether it's important, or a fundamental part of what I'm doing, the work that I'm doing. I'm always asking the subconscious mind for a guidance.
Yeah.
So I'll ask, is it important that I know who it was? Who that person was in a different lifetime? Is it important to this session that she know what the relationship was? Many times it'll say no.
Yeah.
It just says no. It's just important that she know that this happened. Another real quick experience like this very quickly if we have time.
No, please, we're good.
I had another client come in not long ago who had an issue with driving her car, not unlike the other girl, but this one was very different. She was about 32 years old and had a daughter who was about 6 months old, and her daughter was sick. And her husband was holding the little girl, and she was calm and she was sleeping, but they needed some medicine for her. So he asked his wife if she would just run to the CVS or wherever it was to pick up some meds for her. And she said, oh, of course. So she ran out to the car and she started to get in, and she realized she couldn't drive. And she tried to get into the car to drive, and she just felt so upset she couldn't do it. So she went back and told him, I can't do it. Anyway, long story as short as I can make it, she wound up seeing me and saying, I don't know where this came from. All of a sudden, I just can't drive the car alone. I have no idea why this is going on. So I started to do the same kind of work with her, and I started taking her back to find out where the source of the trauma was. And we went farther and farther and farther back until we got to 1 year old, and the subconscious mind said, no, it happened before that. And I said, okay, well, was it a previous life? And said, no. I said, oh, well, it wasn't at a year. And I said, well, was it before a year old? And he said, yes. And I said, but it wasn't a previous life. No. I said, oh, okay, well, then was it during the pregnancy? Yes, absolutely. So I started to question that, and we couldn't get the answer from her subconscious mind. So we talked to her mother, and her mother just said, how did you know? And she said, I don't know. I need you to explain to me what happened. She said, well, this is what happened. When I was about 6 months pregnant, I had some food cravings, and I asked your dad to take us, to the local 7-Eleven or someplace. And she said when he went in to get her what she wanted, she was outside in the car, just sitting in the car, waiting for him to get back. And she had a very unusual feeling come over her. And she looked over to the driver's side of the car, and she saw a man approaching the car. Now, the door lock was not set, so she reached over quickly and smashed it down as fast as she could. And she hit it down just as the guy was trying to pull open the car door.
Oh, my gosh.
And what happened was it was slightly ajar. It was at that place where you could almost force it open. And she was screaming at the top of her lungs. And of course, her husband came out of the store just in time and chased the man off. But she was so traumatized by that she could never be in the car alone. Well, guess who else couldn't be in the car?
Wow.
And it was so interesting because this happened to her when she had a daughter, and there was this whole scenario. I mean, some of these things are time sensitive. When she experienced that form of trauma, it had to do with her daughter as well. And this whole, just kind of drama played itself out and wound up being something that she was experiencing in her body now at that age. Now, mind you, her whole life, she didn't go through that trauma.
No.
Was only at a time-sensitive point in her life when she too had a daughter, and this kind of scenario made itself available to her for her to experience this horrible sense of dread and fear. And of course, once we let it go, she was fine. Driving everywhere, and she was having a ball. But it's interesting because it's not so much about knowing on a conscious level, although that does enter into the picture sometimes. It's about letting go of the trauma that's associated with it, because we literally constrict around the energy involved in a trauma. We're literally constricting around it. We're holding it. We don't even realize that we are. And what happens is we need to let it go. And most people, probably about 99% of the population, don't even know that they're constricting around the traumas that they've experienced in their lives. They have to be able to let it go, and that's a key part, or something that I want to leave people with at the end of our talk today. A method they can employ to actually let go of their traumas. It may not be as effective, let's say, as seeing someone and working with the subconscious mind, but there is a way that on a conscious level you can actually see where you're holding this negativity, let's say, because the energy is just energy. I don't want people to think that energy is negative energy, or it's just energy.
Right.
It's the emotion behind it that gives it the connotation of being negative energy or positive energy. Right. And we'll talk about that right at the end. But anyway, I just wanted to share that story.
That's so wild. Yeah, because it's so, and then the energy. So you were talking about the types of trauma. So let's say something, and we perceive it as negative, right? And we give it a negative emotion, that energy. If it's not handled, like you said, on the emotional level, then that energy physically can become issues, correct?
Yes, it will. Invariably, it will escalate at some time or another. It will become physical.
Yeah.
And then if we don't deal with it on the physical level at some time or other, it's going to wind up going to a cellular level, because that's the natural escalation of those traumas, is for it to move from one to the other. We need to actually address them when we notice them.
Yeah.
What people standardly do is that the process of threes that I usually refer to is that when people are experiencing those kinds of traumas, their standard way of dealing with them is to suppress them, which is what most people do. The second one is they try to move away from them. Now, the movement itself is interesting because, it's not just physically moving away from an issue, because many times we will just emotionally move away from something, in relationships and that sort of thing. But the physical part of it is interesting because people will literally bounce from one relationship to another when it's, it starts getting difficult, or some part of them feels threatened or vulnerable, and they feel that they need to get out of that situation. They'll just bounce right out of one situation after another. But this also can be found in obsessive compulsive disorders. This is where they literally will manifest in one way or another, where a person will start, let's say, washing their hands excessively, or locking the door 10 times before they leave, or, arranging their shoes a certain way, and, that kind of thing. And it winds up, it's movement itself that is another way of adjusting to the trauma.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So it could be literal movement, like the act of doing that, or larger movements that you might not notice as much as moving from place to place or changing relationships or changing jobs.
Exactly, yeah. And we fall into those cycles so many times that we think it's very normal for us to just, when difficulty happens or whatever, the situation is, the person will just make that adjustment and just say, well, you know what, this is just the way I am. If it gets too emotional for me, I just can't stay. I got to bounce out of this. The third way that people generally will deal with negative emotions is they will medicate. And medication takes on many different forms.
Absolutely.
It can be food, can be drugs, alcohol, can be any number of things. People will find a way to try and adjust the pain that they're experiencing in their emotions. They're trying to find a solution to it out there in the world. And it's never going to be there. There's always going to be something else that's going to say, well, that wasn't enough booze. You're going to have another drink to numb that feeling, and then it's just going to be more and more and more and more. There's never an end to that search for the resolution out there in the world. They've got to find it inside themselves.
And what I like about that, too, is with your example that you spoke of before, the woman who she noticed that she didn't really want to crave alcohol anymore and she didn't really want to smoke. So as you clear up these belief systems that might seem super linear, it really starts clearing up all sorts of things because the body operates as a whole. And I love that example because I think not enough people realize that one issue actually can also be connected to another issue, can be connected to another issue.
I mean, the connection throughout is enormous. I mean, it's massive. There's all kinds of stuff going on all the time in everyone, and they have this connection. They do have a connection, but more often than not, they don't know what it is. They just see it, and they make their own adjustments, so to speak, thinking that that's how that this is how it's always worked for me in the past. I just go out and I binge drink for 2 or 3 days, and then I come back and try to assume the rest of my life. But it never really solves the problem. The only way that you can let it go, and it's been my practice has been built on it, is if you actually find the original source of the trauma and you release it at its form, at its seed, let's say. Okay. When we let it go at its point of origin, all the other things that were associated with it just fall away. Just like this lady, she didn't even want to stop drinking. She didn't want to stop smoking. Right. She just wanted to get over the heartache she had with this breakup. But in letting go of all of that and finding out the original source of the trauma, everything else cleared up for her. She just didn't want to drink. She didn't want to smoke. She said she was feeling happy, and she said, this is something I haven't felt in, months. I haven't felt this good, and had to come back for another session.
I love that. I think that's awesome. And I do appreciate even bringing up the cellular part of it too, and just these cancers or these autoimmune issues where the body's attacking itself, or all these other chronic illnesses. And, medication has its limitations, but people, if they don't go to that underlying root, which oftentimes, like you said, starts in an emotional or some sort of trauma, it might just end up morphing into another type of cancer, or it comes back again. And because like you said, it's not getting that seed of the issue.
Yeah. I think that, and I'm not opposed to people having those aids, let's say,
Absolutely.
But, because initially, especially if a person is very seriously traumatized by life and they're feeling, suicidal or something like that, they definitely need something in the immediate now to solve that issue for themselves, to get them on a higher plane so that they're not feeling as depressed or filled with such anxiety. In fact, my own story has to do with a brain tumor that I actually had about 36 years ago. Wow. And I didn't know, I wasn't doing this particular kind of work at that time. I was still helping people. But even I, in doing the work that I was doing, excuse me, had the experience of developing a brain tumor at one point in time. And I was very, very sick.
Wow.
And my girlfriend at the time, who was still living in Hollywood, very, very good friend of mine, told me that she thought that I was going to die. While we were in our relationship, she was like preparing for my death because I looked so ill. My hair had fallen out. I had a full body rash. I was having coordination problems. I had lost a dramatic amount of weight. I looked like I was, on my way out. And she happened to mention that a friend of hers had, a friend of hers had breast cancer and gone to an herbalist in Santa Monica. And out of desperation, just said, give me your name. I'll try anything at this point. The doctors didn't know how they were going to be able to do, or if they were even going to be able to do a biopsy because the tumor was in a very precarious part of my brain. So anyway, I did go to see this herbalist, and she gave me a tea. It was just this mushroom tea, and she said, "I think this will help you." And she had such a calm, healing way about her that I believed her. And I took these mushrooms home with me, and they were like pieces of wood. They were so hard. I had to grind them up on a grater to make tea out of them. And I drank the tea that first night, and it was kind of bitter. And then I went to sleep, and the next morning I knew that it was gone because my rash was gone, and I felt so good. I can't even begin to tell you how I felt. In one day, I just drank 1 cup of that, and I was supposed to drink it for like 5 days. So I continued the process, but by the end of the week, when I was supposed to go back and see the doctors about the possibility of doing some kind of a biopsy, they noticed the difference, and it was so dramatic that they said, "You've got to go back to the MRI guy because, we're thinking that something has happened in your brain and your body's obviously changed. You're going to have to go back and get another MRI." I went back to the doctor and the radiologist, and they couldn't find the tumor. It was gone.
Wow.
It was completely gone. Now, I can, everybody always says, "Oh, what was that herbalist's name?"
I know. And what mushroom was that?
Name was that, but she no longer practices, in the United States. She went back to France. But there was a lot of pressure put on her because she was a healer. She was a natural healer, and there was something about the way she handed me the mushrooms or whatever. I don't know whether it was in fact the mushrooms that cured what I had, but there was something about her presence and my belief in her that just said, this is going to cure me. Right. I just felt that way. Now, we currently experience that with the placebo effect. When doctors are giving people a sugar pill to manage their 4th stage cancer.
Absolutely.
And they get cured of lemon-sized tumors with a sugar pill. Well, how does that happen?
Right. Absolutely. If you believe, just exactly. Like you were saying, those deep-seated belief systems. Mm-hmm. And that's true. I mean, there's always those wonderful, there's different types of therapies or medications or whatever that help stabilize that person as you reach those deeper core belief systems, which is huge. Do you believe that in your case, talking about that deeper seed, was there more work you had to do personally, do you believe, for that? Or do you believe that with that whole interaction with the herbalist, it sort of started wiping out some of those deeper belief systems that you had or trauma?
Yeah, there was a combination of things there that I think I let go of during that time as I look back on it. I was letting go of resentment that I had for my father. I had a very unusual experience with a person, a medium of sorts, who was basically extorting money from a lot of people. And I saw that in that person, and it was kind of out of my control. What I said to her was, and this was, of course, coming from my higher self, the Choury that I know would never say something like that to her. But that higher self in me noticed that she was basically extorting money from people, and I told her that was not the thing to do, and she got very angry with me, and she told me that I would actually get sick, and I did wind up getting sick.
Wow.
the tumor actually developed, I literally bought into what she had
She has
said.
said.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, I bought into what this herbalist said too, and that was the cure. So it's really interesting how the
So
story
fascinating.
unfolds, because we're so vulnerable, and most of us are exceedingly vulnerable, and we don't know that we're being so subconsciously influenced by the world around us. And this is why I'm very careful what I watch on television or listen to on the radio, because so much of it has to do with negative programming. And we wind up believing it, that, oh, well, there's something missing in my life. I need to take this pill, or I need to take that product, whatever it happens to be. And, we feel so vulnerable to it that we feel that we're getting whatever it is they're suggesting that we might have. We're getting this feeling that we're actually getting that disease, or that rash, or that headache, or whatever it happens to be. We're so suggestible. I tell people often that my business, people often think of it as me putting people to sleep and then, getting them to a healthy place on the other side. But more often than not, I'm waking them up to the fact that they've been hypnotized by so much of the advertisements that are going on, and by the world around, and by the things that people have said to them year after year after year that they've allowed to become a part of their lives. And they don't even realize that a lot of these things that they have bought into are not true at all. I often will challenge these cliches that people will have. For instance, one of the common ones that you hear all the time is, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I'm always saying to my clients, why would you have a cake if you can't eat it? What are you going to do with it?
I know.
Mount it up on the wall somewhere? What do you do with a cake? You're supposed to eat the cake.
Right.
But, that saying is so commonly ingrained in our consciousness that we are using it as a form of self-sabotage most of the time. When we get to a certain level of success, we will say to ourselves, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. No, you're supposed to eat your cake. It's okay for you to eat that cake. And I'm always encouraging people to step outside of the parameters of the belief system that they've been imposed, that has been imposed upon them, I should say.
That they now believe so deeply to their core.
Right. Because there's
awesome.
So much more out there for them than they could ever imagine. And if they let go of those traumas, their natural state is to be in a state of abundance. I've never had to work on a person achieving anything, even though many of the people that I've worked with have wound up becoming enormously successful in their businesses, their relationships, their health, and all the rest of it. But I didn't do anything about getting them to that state. What I did was help them let go of everything that wasn't that. And they automatically move into that state of having and being in a state of abundance in every area of their lives. When you let go of the stuff that isn't you, and all of those traumas and all of those old belief systems that aren't you, your natural state is in a state of abundance.
I love that. That's so awesome. I think that is so important for people to hear too. And they can start reframing that as their belief system. I think now is a great time for you to take us through how a little self-practice on how to find some limiting beliefs or traumas.
Okay.
And I'm excited too.
Well, here is what I would ask a person to do. And, we obviously don't have a lot of time, but if you are listening to this, let's say this recording, or you're listening to it on the radio or something and you're driving, don't do this process while you're driving. Be in a place where you're not threatening anybody with your car or anything like that. But if you're sitting quietly in some place, and we're just going to go through this process in just a few minutes, the idea behind it is to get into a very relaxed state. So I would ask you to find a place that's very comfortable, and to sit back and relax, and then to take in a nice deep breath. And the idea behind this is to fill your lungs as much as you can. So taking in a deep, deep breath, filling your lungs as much as you can, holding that breath in your lungs just for a second or two, and then releasing it. And now notice everywhere in your body that you may have some stress. And I mean isolate it as much as you can. Look for it on the top of your head. Let that scan, so to speak, move down over your forehead and relax your forehead. Relax your eyebrows, your eyelids, your nose, your lips, your chin. Look for any stress that you may have there. And the stress can be something as simple as grinding your teeth. How often do you do that? Or maybe you're feeling a little stress in your neck, or maybe it's in your shoulders. And I want you to look for it. I want you to just notice where it is and then allow it to leave. And when I say allow it to leave, I mean just open a doorway there, and through your imagination, open a doorway that just lets the energy leave your body, remembering that the energy is neither good nor bad, it's just energy, but we've been constricting around it. So just let it go. Let it move. Let this consciousness of letting go move down your biceps to your elbows, your forearms, your wrists and fingers. And feel that little tingle in your fingertips right now. That's just energy. Everybody can feel that. Now focus on your shoulder blades. And this is going to move all the way down your spine, from your shoulders down to your middle back, down to your lower back. And just let go. See if you can open a doorway there, an imaginary doorway, wherever you're feeling any back pain, any shoulder pain. And just open the doorway, let the energy move out of your body. Now let's move to the front of the body, your neck, your chest, stomach, the abdominals. As you're breathing, visualize that you're opening portals. Now, one of the bigger portals in our physical body is right in the area of the solar plexus. Now, I usually open up a doorway there that's like a garage door. It's just like massive. I let that open up and let that energy just flow right out of my body. Remembering that energy is something that we are. It needs to move through us. It doesn't stagnate in us. We're the ones that hold on to it. When we stagnate anything, it creates a quagmire of negativity. We want to let it flow. And I want you to visualize that all of the organs of the body are doing the same thing. While you're doing this process, your heart and lungs are relaxing. Your stomach is relaxing. Any pain or tension that you may have in that area, just visualize that you're letting it go. Let it move down to your intestines. Let it move down past your hips to your thighs, knees, calves, ankles, and feet. And let your whole body just experience this flow of energy. It's just continuously flowing through your body. And while you're in this perfect state of relaxation, visualize that you're just releasing the energy that's moving through you, that all the energy that's moving through the universe, no matter how far away it is, it's just moving through you. And everything and anything that you've held on to in the way of any kind of stresses, you're now releasing. And the thing to remember in this process too is that there's a way for you to know what emotions are yours and which ones aren't. Many of the people that will be listening to this are people who are naturally empathic. It's important to know that you pick up a lot of other people's emotions and that they make a residence in you and you constrict around them. Right now, I want you to open yourself up and let that energy flow. And I want you to understand, most importantly in all of this process, the emotions that are yours and the ones that aren't. Many people will say, well, I don't know which ones are mine and which ones aren't. Here's the key. The ones that make you feel good are yours. The ones that make you feel bad are not yours. It's that simple. Allow those positive energies to move through you, the positive emotions to move through you. The energy, again, is just energy, but it's allowing the energy to flow effortlessly through you. And remembering what I said, that the feelings that make you feel good are yours. The ones that don't aren't. And you can send them right back to wherever they came from as the energy moves out of your body. Those old thoughts, those old ideas of anything that ever made you feel unworthy, they're not yours. Let go of them, release them. Now, in a moment, I'm going to count back from 3 to 1. When I get to 1, I want you to take in another deep breath, filling your lungs as deeply as you can. And then hold on to that breath just for a second or two. And then exhale. And I want you to feel as if that exhale, in that exhale, you are releasing all of those old stifled negative energies. You're letting them come right out of your body. When you open your eyes, I want you to wake up feeling renewed and refreshed and feeling much, much better than before. Counting back now from 3, 2, 1. Deep breath.
That is so fantastic.
Thank you.
I can tell why you also do what you do because your voice is perfect for it.
Oh, thank you. That's so good to say, Nicole. Thank you.
Choury, that was so good. I absolutely so appreciate your time, and I know this is going to be so beneficial for so many people.
Thank you.
And I will make sure that I gather your information so people know how they can reach you, and that will be easy for them to see on the website and everything. So, Choury, thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure, Nicole. Thank you so much.
That was so fun. I could talk about this stuff all day long. So thank you so much. And I will make sure that everything's available so people can see. Thanks again.
Thank you, Nicole. Have a wonderful day.
You too.